This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Nowadays, modern psychologists are expected to adhere to a strict and rigid code of ethical principles to ensure the validity of their practices and the safety of the patients and participants. Any psychological experiments that are to be conducted are forced to undergo an extensive review by a competent board of experts and receive their approval before proceeding. However, it was not always the case. The formal acknowledgement of these ethical guidelines by the American Psychological Association happened only after the famous Stanford prison experiment conducted by Professor Philip Zimbardo. Despite the fact that the experiment provided interesting results, the data accumulated during the research was later used as a basis for the improvement of prison conditions, but it still violated several ethical guidelines. It put the physical and mental health of the participants at unnecessary risk. The purpose of this paper is to explore the moral qualms of the Stanford prison experiment. Professor Philip Zimbardo, when conducting his study, wanted to find out how readily the participants would adapt and conform to the roles of a prisoner and a guard during a role-play exercise. The investigation was sparked by numerous reports of the brutality of the guards in prisons. This experiment was supposed to answer whether this tendency had something to do with the personalities of the guards or the environment that they found themselves in. For this experiment, 24 participants were chosen out of 75 volunteers. The students were split in half. One group had to play the prisoners, and another, the guards. The setting emphasized realism, the fake prison looked very real, and the professor even arranged an unexpected arrest of the participants in their homes by the local police department. The prisoners were told to refer to one another only by their numbers. The guards wore dark shades to avoid direct eye contact with the prisoners. No explicit rules about prisoner conduct were given, aside from the fact that no violence was allowed. The guards were instructed to maintain order through any means necessary. Although the experiment was meant to last for 2 weeks, it was terminated after 6 days. The research became famous due to the unexpected brutality that the mock guards showed toward the prisoners. All participants were tested before the experiment and showed no inclination towards sadistic behavior. During these 6 days, the guards treated the prisoners with increasing neglect, contempt, and abuse. There was one case of a prison riot when the participants barricaded themselves in their cells. One prisoner had to be released from the experiment due to experiencing a psychological breakdown. The experiment concluded that the brutal behavior of the guards was a situational behavior and not a dispositional one. The study has received numerous criticisms concerning professional ethics. The major points of all ethical complaints include a lack of fully informed consent and endangering the participants' mental health. The participants were unable to give fully informed consent, and the professor himself was unable to predict the results of the experiment. The episode with the fake arrests was a last-minute addition that none of the participants consented to. Not only was this incident a breach of ethics, but it was also a violation of the contract Zimbardo signed with the participants. However, a much more pressing concern was endangering the participants' mental health. The students involved in the experiment were exposed to much stress, humiliation, and psychological harm. One of the prisoners suffered a mental breakdown and had to be released from his cell prematurely. He succumbed to uncontrolled bursts of screaming, crying, and laughter. Although no permanent long-term effects were noticed for any of the subjects, it was still a case of dangerous misconduct. The experiment breached the general principles of psychological ethics, such as the principle of benevolence and non-maleficence and the respect for people's rights and dignity. Professor Zimbardo was fortunate that the experiment he conducted did not cause any lasting or permanent damage to the participants. As the incident with the breakdown of one of the students had shown, the possibilities for psychological trauma were plenty. The experiment should have been stopped after that incident. Instead, it continued for 3 more days. It was terminated only after the interference of Christina Maslach, who was brought in to conduct interviews with the guards and the prisoners. The history of unsavory experiments shows that the experiments, which have little regard for morals and ethics, tend to lend better results. However, there is a danger in such a way of thinking. Modern psychology is dedicated to helping people and studying human behavior. These goals could be achieved without endangering those who agreed to aid the scientists in their noble goals. It should stay that way. Perhaps these measures would restrain the speed of progress. However, it is better this way. The scientific community should take care not to undermine the trust the people are putting in them. The public outrage caused by the Stanford experiment shows how fragile that trust could be. This essay on ethical issues with the Stanford prison experiment was written and submitted by a student just like you. The IvyPanda Samples database hosts thousands of works similar to this one on various subjects. Visit ivypanda.com to find what you are looking for, free of charge.